centre is not holding in South Africa.
Start here. Chaos broke out during Friday's EFF march to Brackenfell High School in Cape Town. More than 1,000 supporters took part and police fired stun grenades to disperse the crowds.
I'm sure that you've noticed it, that our country, our nation, South Africa, is falling apart. The centre's not holding and things are falling apart. In simple terms, what is happening is that when no one is in charge, when you genuinely lack leadership and someone taking control of the situation with a mind to build a country, when that is not there, everything from the economy, infrastructure to social life in a nation begins to fracture. Sometimes referred to as the social order or the social fabric. It begins to wear away, to tear apart, because those who are meant to take care of it, to maintain it, and to grow it, have failed in their duties, and no one is in charge. When this happens, people begin to split across the natural and fundamental lines, causing factions and schisms along ideological lines, socioeconomic lines, racial lines, and religious lines, historic, tribal, and any other that people respond to or side with naturally. This is what is happening in South Africa. The socio-fabric has fallen apart like an old piece of cloth because no one is in charge, and therefore the center is not holding. This then leads to the rise of factions, of which there are 5 major ones in South African society today. You can actually understand why they would spring up. However, I don't think any of them are good for the nation long term and will actually destroy this country if they are not caused to fail. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
The first faction that is not good for the country are the globalist type. They see South Africa as just another outpost for self-enrichment and growing their portfolios. South Africa is more of an asset class than a nation to them. The main figure in this group in South Africa today is a man called Rob Hatsoff. Robert Hatsoff is a prominent South African entrepreneur, private investor, and outspoken political commentator. Born in Johannesburg on October 9th, in 1960, he's a third-generation member of a significant South African business family. His grandfather, Bob Hatsoff, co-founded Anglovaal, one of the country's largest mining and industrial conglomerates. In other words, South African old money. It saddens me to put him in this video today because when he first burst onto the scene, it seemed like he was a genuine patriot who had the means, influence, and name to really do something and defend South Africa and was coming from a good place. However, the longer he has gone on for, he has shown himself to be a globalist oligarch. He adopted conservative views and aligned himself with us when he saw how strong this side is and what reach and network we possess online and all over the world.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
He's not a real conservative like the rest of us. He is someone who is using the conservative side and message to fit his ends. That in itself is not the worst thing, because this is politics after all. The issue is that to what end is Rob Hatsoff driving to, especially when he says things like this.
Or the USS Abraham Lincoln does not go back home via the Suez, but heads down here and parks off Durban and Simonstown. That is the only way this place will change. Quick.
Do you think that's even vaguely possible? The USS Abraham Lincoln?
I mean, we're all dreaming of a Venezuela here, aren't we? Imagine if Cyril, Fikile, Julius just got helicoptered out and ended up in orange overalls. Wouldn't that be the great day?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
This is something unheard of for a true conservative to say, let alone a patriot. In other words, what he is saying is come and violate our nation's sovereignty. A true conservative would never open up his nation and call for some other nation, let alone a predatory empire, to come in and attack his nation and kidnap its leaders. This is globalist behavior. One of the most reprobate, turncoat, elitist, and disgusting Freemason thinking I've ever seen or heard from a South African public figure.
You're a demon.
For if the US pulls up its aircraft carrier on the coast of Cape Town and starts carrying out military action against our nation or the ANC leaders as Rob would have it. By that act, we have become occupied by America, because once something like that begins, it is difficult for them to leave or to stop. They will own this nation. People will revolt and take sides, and when that fighting starts, where do you think Rob will be?
I said, hold up.
I'll tell you. In Dubai, on a beautiful property. In England, on a manor. In Switzerland, in the mountains. In Australia, on the beach, sipping drinks and relaxing, while he signs deals and signs this country away. What deals, you ask? Deals to rebuild the country, of course, because we would have been bombed back into the Stone Age. And off those contracts, Rob Hatsoff and his globalist friends would earn billions. I hate Cyril Ramaphosa with a fire of 1,000 suns, yet I would never advocate for another country to violate our sovereignty. If Cyril is to be dealt with, we South Africans, of all races, should be the ones to do it. History tells us that's the best way, and the best method that citizens of a nation can use is voting him out. Revolts, coups, bombings by predatory empires always leave that country in devastation. And those sort of revolts and coups are just the sort of thing Freemason, oligarch, Epstein class types call for all the time.
You're a demon.
They would call for an empire to strike, knowing full well that they themselves would be in no danger at all. In fact, they would stand to benefit richly from this. Rob and the sort of big business old money elites that are not patriots and seek to use an empire to bring down the ANC are actually risking the sovereignty of South Africa in total. This is low down, it's dirty, and it's evil. They endanger all our lives and will destroy this nation until all that is left is a hollow land only good for natural resources and holiday resorts. I would say he should be ashamed of himself for even proposing that. However, globalists have no respect for the sacred, they have no respect for life, and no respect for anyone else's freedom but their own. All they want is more.
Where there's smoke, there's fire. We all suspect, we're all pretty sure that Tehran has been funding the ANC. We've all heard the stories. They were bankrupt, couldn't pay their bills. Suddenly they had money. Naledi Pandor shuttling back and forward to Iran. There's no doubt in any of our minds, Iran has been funding the ANC. And one condition, which Helen made pretty clear, was the Islamists of the ANC are in charge of DIRCO.
This faction exists because no one is in charge. Thus, they see an open door to run through and take charge. Unfortunately, it is not to the benefit of South Africans. This group does not see South Africans as their countrymen, who they should work with to protect and to grow the nation. That is why they are more than happy to push the white genocide and ask America to sanction South African leaders, knowing that sanctions will not hurt the leaders. They will in fact hurt the average citizen the most.
Imagine you had to close your business because you can't buy the materials to continue. That's the situation Leila Danishvar is facing.
We already had problems in getting the raw materials. Stainless steel mainly it's imported. So already we had problems, and now I can say it's impossible.
US sanctions have meant her manufacturing business is suffering. Sanctions have a way of affecting everyone, but how exactly do they work? A sanction is essentially a way to pressure a country. They are decisions made by a nation to change its relationship with a target country, and are used for a variety of reasons, from punishment to forcing or preventing action.
The ANC leaders are rich, and they will make sure they do not lack anything, even if the rest of us will go without. If the globalist like Rob Hatsoff is not fully pushing white genocide, they then run around to foreign countries and act against South Africa and all of us who are supposed to be his countrymen, while never outwardly saying that there is clearly no genocide. They let people keep believing that there is, because it suits their goal. So they can push for more power and riches because no one is in charge. They run to the US and still expect people to believe that they are patriots and view the rest of us as their countrymen as they look to destroy the nation for their own ends and rip it apart. Those who say that maybe the country should be ripped apart know nothing of history and are falling for a rich man's trick. They will become a globalist slave. Rob Hatsoff would be very glad to do that for you. Him and his friends, or should I say, his brotherhood. Why the globalists must fail. The globalists are traitors. They pretend to be working on behalf of South African citizens. They are fake conservatives using conservatism to manufacture consent. They are enemies of South Africa and its people because they would lie about us to their friends in the empire and see the country ripped apart if it meant they could become rich. I actually wish Rob was for real because he's actually the sort of person who can do something. Unfortunately, he is a globalist and a true example of the globalist types that will gladly see this country hollowed and turned into a labor and resource hub. This is why his faction must fail. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
The South African government has yet again had to dismiss U.S. President Donald Trump's claim of human rights abuses against white farmers. This after Trump says he will boycott the G20 summit in Johannesburg this month on the basis of the unsubstantiated claims. Earlier this year, lobby groups AfriForum and Solidarity met with representatives of the Trump administration, seeking what they described as to advocate for the interests of Afrikaners in South Africa, to discuss concerns about land expropriation without compensation, and request that the U.S. place pressure on the South African government regarding its laws and policies. And this has since snowballed into heavily fractured diplomatic relations between South Africa and the United States, and seeing Trump offer refugee status to Afrikaners.
The Separatist. The second faction that is not good for the country are the Separatist type. They see South Africa as predestined land given to them by God or nature, with prophecies to back that up. South Africa is more of a God-given homeland that they were predestined to occupy and possess. The main figure in this group in South Africa today is a man called Willem Petzer. Willem Petzer is a South African political commentator, digital content creator, and activist known for his focus on Afrikaner interests and the South African farming community. Based in the Gauteng region, he has established a significant online presence through his YouTube channel and social media platforms. Willem makes some great videos and is right to advocate for his people, his culture, and his beliefs. It is one of the things I like about him, actually.
Perfect.
The shortcoming is the bottom line of his work, which also includes the misguided effort of apartheid revisionism. The bottom line of all his work, once he gets really down to it, is that Willem wants an Afrikaner state or homeland, somewhere here in South Africa. He wants Afrikaners to separate from South Africa and build their own nation. I know Willem considers himself a student of history, so the question has to be asked for the separatist, that have you really studied history? Do you really know what happens when someone wants to push a country towards fracture or for one group to secede from that country?
The most important thing about the Battle of Shiloh is that it is the first big battle of the Civil War. You know, we'll have other Shilohs come along after this, just with different names, Antietam, Chickamauga, Gettysburg. But you have to remember, this is the first one of this kind. Americans don't know anything like this. There are more casualties here than there are men in armies in the Revolution or the War of 1812. Shiloh, although it's not on the Mississippi River itself, is still the largest battle that is fought in the Mississippi Valley campaign.
Another figure in the separatist movement is Cape Independence advocate Phil Craig. Phil Craig is a British-born, ironic, South African political activist and co-founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. He is a primary leader and spokesperson for the movement seeking to establish the Western Cape as an independent, sovereign state separate from the Republic of South Africa. The separatist movement in South Africa exercises some of the shallowest thinking you may witness, devoid of historical reference and context. For one, if Willem wants an Afrikaner state, I do not see why he shouldn't have one, and others who would like to join him should do so as well. Yet why assume that South Africa and all its other people should just give you one here, on this land? Isn't that a bit presumptuous, given the history? Same goes for Cape Exit. Why do the separatists feel so entitled to a piece of what is now called South Africa? The The separatists often reference 1910 as the beginning of South Africa, and that before that, things were far more separate. Why only go back to 1910? What if someone says they want to divide the land by 1510 boundaries based on the peoples that were here then? What then? The separatists can have a place for themselves and separate from South Africa if they want. That is their right. I don't have a problem with that. Why not the Netherlands? Why not in Germany, France, England, or anywhere else on the face of the planet? Argentina, many places on this planet would be glad to have these people who want out of South Africa because many of them are very skilled and very productive people. Why not build your separatist homeland anywhere else on this planet if you just can't stand to be part of South Africa and with all these other people in South Africa? Even the US would be glad to take in many of the people that want to separate from South Africa. In America, people can even buy an entire town. Why not make a new Krugersdorp, a new Falk, or a new Port Elizabeth, somewhere in an old town that you can just buy out in the United States? Why not? If you want out, really do it then. Why keep fighting for South Africa and yet saying you want nothing to do with it and all those other people of different colors and different cultures in the country? Just stop. This is ridiculous. No one is forcing you to be here and no one is chasing you away either. Build your separatist dream anywhere you want. Do not presume that you're going to have a piece of South Africa just because you want it.
Come on now, dog. Come on, man.
No group is entitled to pieces of South Africa just because. This is giving Zionist vibes. People who know history will tell you secession is bad for countries and for people therein. Instead of fighting to separate, why not do one of two things? Leave altogether and restart somewhere else. Or do the best option. Why not work with your countrymen to change and build this country that you say that you love? The separatist view is the view of only entitled people who do not understand history and how nations work. Not to mention the obvious complete ignoring of the historical record of South Africa on land, apartheid, and colonialism. It is shallow-minded entitlement that gets a person to think that this is even a good idea in the first place. So why does this idea exist? You can see why this faction exists because no one in South Africa is in charge. A true government that runs South Africa well would, for one, not stand for this sort of borderline treason and would run the country so well that this sort of extreme idea would seem silly. The terrible governance of the ANC and what they have done to the country is what gives such views any legitimacy. Because if the country was run well, most people would see quite clearly and quite easily how ridiculous that idea is. Most people see it now, and the country is being run terribly now.
Well, I think South Africa is a movie. We live in a drama. It's a series. Every day you will be shocked by something new. We have even forgotten what shocked us 2 weeks ago.
These ideas start to sound good to people when the country is in such a terrible state as it is today. They even forget all history and context, some of them, because they want to. The best idea for those who really want to form a homeland is that you can just form it somewhere else on the planet, because no one is chasing you away. No one is chasing these separatists. They want out. If you want out, then really do it. Really go out. It would be best to pursue this sort of homeland that you want on another piece of land. Doing it here will resurrect history, and that always ends in bloodshed and tears, no matter where it's tried in the world. Those who know history will tell you that the separatist is a shallow and limited thinker. That is why their idea must fail. The separatist is a man who has fallen in love with an idea and not the reality of that idea. They are people sniffing their own farts and thinking themselves enlightened. They forget what 1994 actually was. It was not some love fest coming together. That is the outward picture. That is what happened amongst the population once the deal was struck. In truth, what the end of apartheid was a peace treaty, a decision to come together and try to build a nation. What South Africa is going through now is not unique in history or in any nation that have gone through the sort of things this country has. Terrible as it may be, in South Africa now, these are the growing pains that, if dealt with correctly, lead to great nations, even empires. If they left to fester, they lead to banana republics.
We are here from the ANC, one love, one family, from the ANC. Ne?
The separatist is blinded by entitlement, hate, anger, and if I were to give him an olive branch, perhaps disappointment as well. But the separatist is too blinded by these things to think clearly and come up with an actual, real solution, not this limited thinking idea. South Africa can actually be changed and saved. History does show us that actually. It has already happened at least 3 to 4 times in South Africa alone in the last 120 years by my account, that this country has been pulled from the brink and saved. This current problem is not even as difficult as some of the problems we've dealt with in the past, that we have already overcome. The separatist will bring more havoc and strife, all of which will come with destruction and blood. While the plain truth is that all of this separatist idea and all that it will bring with it is that it's both unnecessary and avoidable, because what they are proposing is not even a good idea or a necessary action. They are solving for the wrong problem and will only make things worse. That is why they must fail, which includes the option of leaving altogether. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
I'd like to address you this evening on the judgment handed down by the Constitutional Court on Friday last week. In that judgment, the Constitutional Court found that certain aspects of the National Assembly rules that govern the process for the removal of the President from office are inconsistent with our Constitution.
The Socialist. The third faction that is not good for the country are the Socialist type. They see South Africa as a farm full of unruly animals that they must subdue and put to work. Perhaps we call it pala, to make us all beasts of burden, working each day, not thinking too much, and of course, making them the rich ruling elite. Wow! South Africa is their property in their minds. They own the land, the resources, and they own the people. This is how they see all South Africans, as owing them some sort of debt, for which we are all supposed to enslave ourselves to them. Everyone in South Africa knows this faction. They run the country.
We are here from the ANC, one love, one family, from the ANC. Ne?
They are the ANC government and the tripartite alliance, from Cyril Ramaphosa to Fikile Mbalula, Solly Mapaila to Zingisa Losi. This is who runs this country. The Socialist has one man that needs to be highlighted as the typical or main figure in this faction. He is the man or hand behind the power always, at least for the past 15 years, in my opinion. The main figure in this group in South Africa today, in my opinion, is a man called Gwede Mantashe, Satan's Teletubby as I call him. Samson Gwede Mantashe is a veteran South African politician, trade unionist, and the current national chairperson of the African National Congress. Born on June 21, 1955 in the Eastern Cape, he has been a central figure in South African labor and political circles for several years. He is for me the figure of the socialist faction in this country. Let's be clear right from the beginning. Socialism does not work.
In the early 1930s, millions of Ukraine's people died in a devastating famine. Known as the Holodomor, it is one of the most tragic chapters in Ukrainian history. When Ukraine became a part of the Soviet Union in 1922, it was the country's breadbasket, thanks to its fertile fields of wheat. In 1928, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin introduced collectivization, which was supposed to unite privately owned farms into state collective farms called kolkhoz. The Soviet leadership argued that collective farms would be more effective and produce a surplus, which would feed industrial workers. As many Ukrainian peasants were not willing to hand over their land to the state, their fields were confiscated. Many of them were sent into exile or abandoned their homes. In 1932, the government's quota on crops was raised significantly, and farmers were expected to harvest more than before. For many, it was a target that was impossible to meet. What grain they produced was confiscated with nothing left for them or their families. Farmers who hoarded their crops were often punished or executed. The exact number of people who died in the famine of 1932 and 1933 is still not known. Historians estimate that between 3 and 12 million people perished, most of them ethnic Ukrainians. For decades, the existence of the famine was denied by the Soviet Union. Historians in Russia and the West disagree as to whether the famine was man-made and if it was a deliberate attempt to eradicate Ukrainian independence. Since 2006, Ukraine and 15 other countries have recognized the Holodomor as a genocide against the Ukrainian people.
So let's just get that out of the way from the start. It has and will fail anywhere it has ever been implemented. Socialism is a death cult that kills human life, squashes freedom, and strangles free will. It is Satan's own political philosophy. The destruction of South Africa by neglect and picking bad policy is not a consequence of ANC incompetence. Incompetence is just a useful tool to get where they want to get to. Appointing incompetent people helps the socialist achieve his goal, which is to utterly destroy South Africa and bring it to its knees, wherein the economy comes to a halt and all people are dependent on the government. This is what Gwede Mantashe wants. For Gwede and his comrades work on a principle I call unfreedom, meaning pretending to be for and giving freedom while in all ways working to restrict and subjugate all freedoms. You see it in their policy choices. This is not incompetence, this is a plan being executed on purpose in front of our eyes, live and in color. Instead of jobs, they give grants. Instead of safety, they let crime thrive. Instead of sovereignty, they open the borders. Instead of forging new alliances, they stick to old ones.
Come on now, dawg.
Instead of letting people control themselves, they choose centralized power and limit gun rights. Instead of free markets, they choose BEE, where they can choose the winners and who to fund. Over and over again, the ANC seems to pick exactly the wrong policy. This is not a mistake. This is called the National Democratic Revolution.
Countdown to Socialism, the National Democratic Revolution in South Africa since 1994. Briefly explain what the ANC is referring to when it talks of the National Democratic Revolution.
The NDR is a Soviet-inspired strategy which was developed in the 1950s with the idea that there were many newly independent Asian and African colonies at that time, which had predominantly capitalist economies, and the Soviet Union wanted to bring them into its own orbit. So it devised a strategy called the National Democratic Revolution to slowly move them from capitalism to socialism and ultimately to communism via a series of incremental steps. And it recognized that there might be times when you might have quite rapid progress, particularly when a communist party had been solely responsible for bringing about liberation. But when, as more often was the case, you had a mix of parties and organizations, then you had to proceed more slowly, and particularly if the target population was not particularly keen on becoming socialist.
Socialism pretends to love the people while pushing racial, ethnic, and economic tensions, letting the South African police services fall apart to demoralize the populace and breaking down the family with social grants. Freedom and growth is a pretense. What they are really doing is imposing centralized function and control. To Gwede and his faction, the population is not made up of citizens, rather they become widgets or appliances in service of the state.
That is a sign of desperation. All that people are desperate to see is the backside of the president. And we say to the president, don't make it easy for them. Let them work for it.
Why does this faction even exist?
We are here from the ANC, one love, one family.
When the ANC began, they were mainly made up of educated men of capitalist ideology and some of royal lineage. Their lobbying and activism on behalf of the black population, mainly Xhosas at that stage, had stalled and fallen on deaf ears. When the generation of Nelson Mandela and others came about, they wanted to stop just writing letters that would otherwise be ignored by the South African regime. The only people willing to help them fund their movement was the communist USSR. The West turned their back on them and a blind eye to apartheid. This is how many of the politicians of that generation and generations that followed became socialist communist in ideology. Sadly for us today, South Africa is stuck with so many of these people who still uphold the satanic doctrine like Gwede Mantashe. Never mind that the whole ideology steals, kills, and destroys. All they care about is that it steals, kills, and destroys on the rest of us first.
One love, one family from the ANC. Ne?
They are fine with that because they will enjoy the spoils in the meantime. This is the root of why the rotten ideology still exists here today. The rest just follows on from there. It is crucial that as South Africans we ensure that the evil ideology of socialism, communism fails. As I have said, it is strong among the boomer generation and anyone older. However, anyone older may be too old to be that impactful over the long run. Boomers still have the power and the money and the ideology, which is not good for South Africa. Millennials and Generation Z have socialist types among them. However, they're not really for it. South Africans are not interested in socialism at all, really, no matter what the lying Separatist and Globalist says. Because if South Africans wanted that, the EFF and others would be ruling this country already a long time ago. The EFF is now over 10 years old. The Economic Freedom Fighters has never won an outright majority in any metropolitan municipality in South Africa as of mid-2026. Generation X, it's where socialism has its claws the deepest. However, that is still mainly among the black Gen Xers because they remember apartheid, they remember the struggle, and they remember the freedom ideology, and some have really bought into socialism as a means to oppose white power. That hasn't just drifted away or left their minds. It's time for the Gen Xers to move on from that. You won with some dustbin lids and stones because apartheid was a very asinine and hollow idea. Fascism by definition, which much like socialism, also never works. That's why apartheid just fell apart in the end. In the 90s and the mid-2000s, the Gen Xers were called Black Diamonds because they were working and becoming very rich. Many did and still are. For this reason, I think they can be convinced out of socialism easier than one may at first imagine, because they too have not voted for the EFF en masse or as a bloc. They are reasonably or highly educated for the most part and have seen capitalism in South Africa at a very efficient output in the late 90s and 2000s, so they know this country can get there and even be better. And we need to remind them that socialism and communism is a death cult that only seeks to steal, kill, and destroy and has never and will never work. That is why it too, and Gwede Mantashe, Satan's Teletubby, must fail. What South Africa needs is a millennial conservative government. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running? If she goes this way, we go the other way. If she goes this way, we go the other way. Because we know that we are dealing with an invisible hand.
The fourth faction that is not good for the country are the revolutionary type. They see South Africa as a field of competing narratives, views on reality and how things work. What they are trying to do is insert their narrative or story into the field of stories, so as to make people oppose and dislike each other. They want to cause so much division that at some point they emerge as the only answer or solution for South Africa. That is why any way they can, they try to pour paraffin on the fire to get people angry and divided.
Start here. Chaos broke out during Friday's EFF march to Brackenfell High School in Cape Town. More than 1,000 supporters took part and police fired stun grenades to disperse the crowds. Now, the march was staged after an alleged whites-only matric party. The EFF is now giving the school 7 days to fire the principal and 2 teachers.
The main figure in this group in South Africa today is, of course, the man called Sello Malema. Julius Sello Malema is a South African politician and the founder and leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Born on March 3, 1981, in Seshego, Limpopo, he has been a central and often polarizing figure in South African politics since his youth. He is everyone's favorite Gucci revolutionary who plays socialist communist on television. While being nothing of the sort, this man is a fake. He pushes ideas that he does not believe or hold in his own life in order to gather to himself followers. Followers he deploys to stir up division.
Me personally, I wouldn't take this level of disrespect.
As he tries to plant his narrative of reality in the heads of as many black people as he can in order to use them to take over the country at some point. Now, Juju is a Gucci revolutionary, so he would like to avoid actual gunfire if he can. He only talks tough and shoots into the air because it's an aesthetic, a style, a motif of this character that he's playing. Julius is a fraud and a scammer. Malema is no revolutionary because if the things he touts, like white monopoly capital, why not fight? If you're a revolutionary and bring down the entire thing. Revolution requires blood and sacrifice. Malema will never. It also destroys and displaces people. It brings countries to ruin and dysfunction from which they may never recover, or it takes decades, even centuries to recover from. It is a terrible idea for South Africa in reality or in the fiction that Juju is pushing. He's not telling the truth. He is a liar. What he's trying to do is build enough power and enough people so that he wins elections and the capital in the country actually has to come to him to negotiate with him, to come to the negotiation table and negotiate with him and have sort of a second Cadessa with him. This is not the revolution of economic freedom for South Africans. This is economic freedom for him and his friends and his family. He is a tool of division.
The only thing we need to do is to make sure that this prosecutor, who is arrogant and suffers from a short man syndrome, is taught a lesson.
Why this even exists at all? This faction exists because there were many disaffected people who did not want to vote for the ANC and would not vote for the DA or anyone else. Malema then was expelled from the ANC and thus sought to make a political home for these people and young people with no fathers. I mean young people who believed the revolutionary sentiment of Julius Malema.
Stop it. Get some help.
Thankfully, no one trusts this guy or believes most of what he says, and many of the members on the ground either don't believe or really agree with his ideology. It is a political home or a career move for many people part of the EFF. Malema has stalled because people know what he is. A character, playing a role on television and trying to use his followers to get power and rich.
Magistrate Olivier is a racist of note, and she must know that in her sleep, that she's a racist and she's possibly a member of AfriForum. That's why when you mention AfriForum, she cannot hide her emotions. We're trialed by a magistrate who doesn't read.
He and the toy store revolutionaries have already failed, actually. They are only hanging on because the country is in disarray. If the country begins working efficiently, their relevance will dwindle even more. They have already failed. Why do you think he and Jacob Zuma are trying to unite? What a joke. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
We are not traditional leaders. We are royalty. There's a difference, a huge difference between traditional leaders and royalty. So I think that's one of the contexts that were misinterpreted.
The fifth faction that is not good for the country are the monarchist types. They see South Africa as a configuration of kingdoms that need to separate again. These people do not really mean it. What they actually want is to fracture the nation and break the ANC. The main figure in this group in South Africa today is the man that just won't do us all a favor and go away. A man called Jacob Geleklegisa Zuma, who is a veteran South African politician who served as the fourth president of South Africa from 2009 to 2018, God-forsaken years, a central figure in the anti-apartheid struggle. His career has been defined by his rise through the African National Congress, a tumultuous presidency, and his recent emergence as the leader of the new Umkhonto weSizwe. As we all know in South Africa, if Jacob Zuma is involved, of course it's a terrible idea, and a lie, and a scam, and a non-truth. Much like the globalists, the separatists, the socialists, and the revolutionaries, is a very bad idea for the country. Jacob Zuma is not even really serious about it. He is merely using this call to get the kings and the queens behind him so they can bring the people they rule to build up his voting numbers and take away from the ANC, putting pressure on the ANC so that they can let him back in somehow as an ANC partner, a partnership between the MK and the ANC or something like that. Much like the globalists, the separatists, the socialists, and the revolutionaries, he does not care what will happen to the citizens if the kingdoms begin to revolt against Pretoria. This is what the separatists also want. People like Willem Petzer, Phil Craig, even Ernst Roots also would like to see something like the monarchists are advocating for. That's why they always say things like the Zulus and others should get their own kingdoms, because the separatist wants a piece of this country too. The thing that they don't say, which is quite obvious, is that the Zulus and the other kingdoms already have pieces of this country, already have their own kingdoms, as they've had for centuries already. The monarchist view is short-sighted and a lack of historical insight, just like with the other factions. For if these kingdoms begin revolting, there's no telling where such a thing goes or where it ends, if it even ends. Jacob Zuma, of course, does not care about that. He just wants to stick it to Ramaphosa and the ANC, and he might be long dead by the time the true troubles come. He doesn't care if the nation is destroyed, neither does the globalist, the separatist, the socialist, or the revolutionaries. These are flawed, lazy thinkers, the lot of them. Why the monarchists exist? It's just a method for a faction who want power to try and gain it, that's all. All 5 of these factions are actually like that and have many similarities and overlaps in their goals and in their tactics. The monarchists exist because it is just another tactic and point of division that can be used to generate or gather people, power, and votes.
South Africa is a movie.
They really are talking to the issues, the fundamental issues of what MK is all about.
They must fail, mainly because JZ is involved in it. And if he is involved, it must fail and be opposed because it is a bad idea for the country and for the population. Apart from that, it must fail because it is yet another unnecessary bad idea, lacking all historical context, that will only lead to serious disruption, bloodshed, tears, and will destroy the country. The kingdoms are well placed within the system as they are. If anything were to change in this regard, it must be to the benefit of South Africans, in that the kingdoms should be using the funding they get to build institutions that preserve their languages, culture, and develop their people in business, in the arts, while taking care of the family by building healthy families with lots of children. I don't see why the kingdoms could not build their own schools and educate their children. One has to ask, are they working with the ANC all these years to ruin the education system? The monarchists are just power-grabbing, money-hungry politicians by another name. They too must fail. The globalists, the separatists, the socialists, the revolutionaries, and the monarchists are working very bad ideas that will eventually, if not nipped in the bud, will bring more turmoil, bloodshed, and destruction to South Africa. This is what all these ideas eventually lead to all throughout history because they are bad ideas that misunderstand human societies and in fact are just unnecessary and a waste of time. Hence, they must fail. They bring only death and economic turmoil for the population, not the leaders thereof. They must fail. Thank you for listening. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running? Hoya Why are you running? Why are you running?